And correct me if I'm wrong, but there's also off-ramps.
Following Mary, so I'm not quite looking forward to doing that because it's a hard act to follow. But I'm going to be talking about what California did is took the lead role in establishing a national database so that it tracks license records, but also it tracks disciplinary actions. And so if a contractor was licensed in another state and makes request for an exam waiver, whether they make that request or not, we're going to have information if they've had complaint history in that other state. And if they have had some type of action taken in Mississippi or Utah, Arizona, Nevada, that's something that we're going to consider and whether we're going to even accept that and allow that person to obtain licensure in California.
Any other questions or comments from the board?
I have
Johnny.
Again, with reciprocity, I'm absumers. If I have a contractor from Mississippi working on my house or business and they decide that they're not going to finish it and take my money and go home, I just don't know how I'm going to get my money back. I have some serious issues with that sort of thing. I suppose if I lived in Mississippi, I would be really happy. I can, go into the Golden State and make some profit and undercut California contractors, but I'm just not sure how this benefits us. My question, however, is we're only talking about general contractors, correct? B licenses?
From what I understand, yeah, general contractors exam.
Yeah, we're only talking about the B general bills right now that are from other states, not Mississippi, that are asking for consideration on specialty classifications. And as David said, for those, they're going to need to, those trade exams would first need to be reviewed by Heidi Lenser and OPS. And that's why I had the meeting with them to let them know this is happening. We would want them to look at those trade exams, see if they're substantially the same as Californians and California's trade exam. And if they come back and say yes, well, then it needs to go to the licensing committee. Because one thing the licensing committee may want to consider in the future is whether or not there are certain trades, specialty trades, that have a specialized skill requirement or maybe even a code requirement. And the board may want to take the position that we don't want reciprocity for those trade exams. What's here today, though, is a general building class that the board's already approved, that we're already accepting from other states. We have Mississippi making the same request.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the board?
We would take in, like, say, from Mississippi, like 100 people coming over, or 10, or?
Well, is there a limit? I think the board could take that approach if we suddenly had a whole lot of applications in 3 years, so there's not been a whole influx. Another reason why I asked the board to consider this is because while I understand, I don't hear about a shortage of specialty contractors. In the disaster areas, I do hear from builders exchanges that they're having trouble finding general building contractors in some of these areas, especially Paradise. If you were to talk to the North Coast Builders Exchange, which I had a meeting with them not long ago, they're talking about the shortage of contractors resulting in an incredible square foot price to rebuild these homes. And you have homeowners, or you have victims, they're trying to rebuild, can't find a licensed contractor, they're using unlicensed contractors. So I don't know that people are going to come from Utah, Arizona, Nevada, or Mississippi to try to take that, take that remodeling work. But this is an opportunity to at least show that we would consider somebody who's qualified, maybe helping out in those areas if there's truly a need. But we have an influx, too many people applying. There's more contractors than we need. Then I think it comes back to the board, and you can rescind it. Please keep in mind that Frank Altamar is no longer on our board. He voiced concern about Utah. We had a reciprocity agreement with Utah. There were some changes in their licensing structure. He suggested the board review that reciprocity agreement, which the board did, and they rescinded it. We no longer have reciprocity with Utah.
To the chair, the only reason why I just wanted the building department, the only reason why I say it is when you do have people coming from other states and they're coming into California to do work, they start in the area like Paradise, and then they figure how much they're going to make in Paradise, and then they start branching out to other locations where they can make a little bit more and a little bit more. Before you know it, they're not in Paradise anymore, and that's what we were trying to focus towards, is like, we need that help. I don't want to see somebody coming in here and going, oh, I got in because of this reason, where I was making, I'm just going to throw a number of $10 an hour, and now I can go down to San Francisco, and I'm making $110 an hour. They're going to go down to San Francisco. And the problem's still going to happen up, like in Paradise, like you're saying, that situation's still going to be there. And I'm not saying there's a way to fix that or change that. I'm just trying to be aware that it happens a lot where you can't get work because they're coming in going, and they're undercutting other places too as well. So it's,
On where they work. Okay.
Any other comments from the board? Yeah, we work on a lot of agreements in my other life, and we add like a local hire component to it. So maybe we could do some kind of local hire in these reciprocity agreements. So anyways. Any other comments? Public comments, please.
I hear some of the same questions from people in other states. Why are we giving reciprocities from these people from California or Nevada or Arizona or wherever? It's a common question, and it's kind of interesting because while that can be a concern, I think what I see is you have more bigger companies with multiple subsidiaries with qualifiers that are getting this reciprocity, so these multiple subsidiaries can operate in multiple states. I think that's the biggest users of the reciprocity. From what I see, I don't see a ton of people heading this way, more of them heading that way.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. Any other public comment? Question? Okay. Well, seeing none, there's a motion before the board. Or there was a motion brought before the board.
No.
Is there a second?
There was no motion pending before the board. There was a recommendation to the
A
board. but
recommendation,
no pending
that's what it
motion.
is. So there was a recommendation.
I'd make a move to approve the recommendation.
Is there a second? It's been seconded. It's been moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Mary Tykert,
Aye.
Rodney Kobos,
Aye.
David De La Torre,
Aye.
Miguel Galarza, Susan Granzella, Alan Guy,
Aye.
Jacob Lopez, Diana Love, Michael Mark,
Aye.
Steve Pinelli, James Rowan, approved absence, Johnny Simpson. Motion passes.
Thank you very
Okay.
much.
Well, thank you. This concludes the licensing items on the agenda, and I turn it over to Chair Tykert.
Thank you very much. Before we move over to, to public affairs, I'd like to suggest an agenda item for a future meeting, which is, I think this topic raised a couple of really interesting, looking for more data on how many people are going other places, and also all of us are interested in having protection for consumers. So is this really a benefit? There's a part, to Mike's point about if there's really only been 2 noticeable complaints of all the people that came in, it sort of seems like it could be good for consumers, but let's find out more. The other piece, though, is more about administrative streamlining of the board's efforts, which sounds like, I asked David originally, when back in 2018, apparently the board already approved this trade exam, so I wondered why we have an agenda item to approve an instance of something that was already approved. And in general, I feel like the time of this board, we have so many things we need to do, so reapproving things that we already approved isn't how I would think we'd spend our time. But if we need to do specific stuff, like for instance, in this case, it sounds like there's a law and business exam and other criteria that we would always need to talk about. But if we've previously approved something, I would like to think of us as not reapproving each time that specific thing got reapproved, if that makes sense. So what I'd like to suggest is maybe asking staff to propose something that streamlines out the administrative piece of this, which is we already approved this one exam, let's not relook at that. And also collect data for us to have a different conversation about reciprocity if we need to. And say if we want to look at other guidelines, if we want to give other direction to staff, collect other information, let's totally do that. But I don't want to do it through reapproving things we already approved, because that doesn't sound very efficient. And I think we all want to have the ability for the license board to function effectively. So that may be my suggestion for a future meeting's agenda item. Any questions or comments? Cool.
I only had one comment. I think one thing too is every state, if it is drastically different, just like it sounds like there's some issues with Utah where we did approve a reciprocity agreement and we took it away. So it's to have a continued update on reciprocity to the board, maybe like at a yearly basis.
The other thing I'm imagining is we could have some criteria for what are we going to talk about. So if we'd say, we were always going to approve, if there's other stuff that's a variation from California, let's totally talk about it. But if it's a national exam we've already approved, let's not re-talk about that exam. That would be my thought. Does that make sense? Cool. Any other questions or discussion? Okay, then on to public affairs. So for an overview and update, I will turn it over to our public.
Before moving on to public affairs, being that there was no opportunity for public comment on some prior sub-agenda items, the board may want to open the floor to public comment. On,
Okay, sub-agenda items of
F2,
licensing.
F3, I believe.
Oh,
There
okay.
was a opportunity for comment on F1 and F4, but not on F2 or F3.
Thank you very much. Okay, so turning to agenda items F2 and F3, if there's any. Thank you for the highlight. And actually, before we turn it over to public affairs, I'll say thank you to Joe Chin for being here. I neglected to highlight that he's here, and thank you for your service to the board. And it sounds like you've been promoted to the state bar, so congratulations.
Thank you. It's
We're
my
glad to
pleasure
have you
be
for
here.
this meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, so over to public affairs, Chair Alan Guy.
Thank you, Chair Tykert. I want to begin by thanking Public Information Officer Samantha DeMello, seated to my left, for her CSLB Public Information Officer Kevin Durawa and TV Specialist Amy Lawrence for assisting with the AV needs today. Can you two please wave it? Thank you. Turning to page 131 of your packet, I would like to present an update on the Public Affairs Office goals in the 2022 to 2024 strategic plan, which is agenda item G1. Strategic Objective 4.1 reads, expand CSLB's online presence through both standard platforms and emerging technologies to improve effectiveness in educating consumers and the industry. CSLB's Public Affairs Office currently uses social media's latest trends to educate consumers and licensees. CSLB has expanded the use of video posts on its Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. CSLB also uses the Stories feature on Facebook and Instagram regularly, increasing engagement on both platforms. Now to Strategic Objective 4.2. Establish a CSLB-specific new board member orientation to educate board members about legislative processes, licensing and testing functions, and enforcement procedures. The target date for this item is next January. CSLB's Public Affairs Office is currently working with the Executive Office to develop an outline for new board member orientation. The next goal, Strategic Objective 4.3 reads, update the website content, accessibility, and navigation to improve the user experience. CSLB Public Affairs Office updates the website regularly with job postings, industry bulletins, and press releases. Recently on the homepage, Public Affairs staff added information on CSLB's Solar Energy System Restitution Program, including links to important forms and a letter that CSLB distributed to consumers with details on the program. CSLB Public Affairs Office also improved the accessibility of the CSLB videos page to improve the user experience. Turning to Strategic Objective 4.4, develop video tutorials on processes and procedures to reduce consumer, licensee, and applicant errors. For example, how to complete forms. The goal is ongoing with 2 videos per year. In 2022, CSLB television specialist Amy Lawrence developed 2 videos. One is geared towards consumers while the other aimed at licensees. The first video, CSLB Quick Tips, Renew Your License Online, walks licensees through the newly available online renewal process on CSLB's website. The second video is a Spanish translation of CSLB Quick Tips, Gardeners vs. Landscapers, which reminds consumers of the steps to follow when hiring a licensed contractor for outdoor projects. Amy Lawrence is currently developing videos for licensees and applicants, including an update to the What to Expect on Test Day. The last goal, Strategic Objective 4.5, begins on page 133 and states, develop communications with C20, warm air heating, ventilating and air conditioning, and C38, refrigeration, contractors on energy work in line with Governor Newsom's carbon reduction goals. The Public Affairs Office is currently working with the Executive Office to develop an industry bulletin for C20 and C38 licensees. Staff will also amplify the key messages on CSLB's social media channels. The target date for this goal is this December. And now I am pleased to bring you to the Public Affairs update beginning on page 135. I will cover a few highlights. CSLB works to educate consumers so unlicensed or other unscrupulous contractors do not harm them after a disaster. From August 1st to 4th, 2022, the Public Affairs Office represented CSLB at a local assistance center, otherwise known as an LAC, in Mariposa County to help survivors of the Oak Fire. You can find information about the Oak Fire and additional disaster response outreach on page 136. The Public Affairs Office continues to produce videos for promotion on social media and the CSLB website. In addition, staff continues to produce English and Spanish versions of the monthly Get Licensed to Build webcasts. The live webcasts have been well attended by those interested in a contractor's license. Pages 138 to 140 highlight the webcasts and videos produced since the last board meeting. You'll note at the top of page 141 that the number of CSLB social media followers continues to increase on every social media service, a testimony to Public Affairs staff hard work to promote consumer protection. Pages 141 and 142 explain more about that growth and outline our social media highlights, which include a post announcing the Solar Energy System Restitution Program and a week-long campaign about how homeowners can prepare for wildfires using licensed contractors. Public Affairs staff translated the social media posts into Spanish to increase user engagement. As always, we invite you to follow CSLB on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Flickr. So that's a lot of social media. You can find the links on the CSLB website. For stakeholder communications, the Public Affairs staff have issued several industry bulletins. Since our last update to the board in June, we have issued industry bulletins with information about a NASCLA construction scholarship, contractor opportunities in the earthquake brace and bolt program, legislation affecting spouses of active military, and CSLB expanding testing services. On page 146 is information about CSLB's ongoing media relations work. Public Affairs regularly fields inquiries from the media on multiple CSLB-related topics and distributes news releases when appropriate, such as press releases about unlicensed contractor stings. Pages 147 and 148 details the ongoing work with California legislators on our consumer and senior scam stopper workshops. In June 2022, board member Miguel Galarza was a featured speaker at a senior scam topper event held with Senator David Min. Page 148 details the publication and design services of the Public Affairs staff. They are constantly working on new publications and updating outdated information in older publications. In addition to all this work of our Public Affairs staff, they regularly update the employee intranet site with stories, photos, and informational updates. The Public Affairs staff continues to further CSLB's communication objectives, and we thank them for their hard work and dedication. Since this is an informational item, no action is required of the board. Are there any board questions or comments on the Public Affairs update? Chair Tykert, that concludes the Public Affairs Program update.
Thank you, Ellen. Agenda are specific to legislation, and I will turn it over to Legislation Committee Chair Miguel Galarza.
Thank you, Chair Tygert. My name is Miguel Galarza, and I'm pleased to serve as the new Legislative Committee Chair. Maybe that'll work. With that, I will begin the legislative agenda with item 1. Our absent member, Jim Rulain, for doing a great job and being a good mentor and for setting the bar. So I hope to achieve and set that bar even though I'm a little shorter than he is. With that, item 1, update, review, discussion, and possible action items on 2022 through 2024 legislative strategic plan objectives. Beginning on page 156 of your packet, this section of the agenda is to update of the legislative strategic plan objectives. Item 3.1 is to host an annual legislative day to build proactive relationships with lawmakers and to enhance effectiveness. Staff reports that this plan has been delayed until 2023 due to the challenges of coordinating such an event between the pandemic and the construction of the Capitol building and the relocation of those offices to swing spaces. Item 3.2 is to review policies, procedures, and current practices for compliance with the Administrative Procedure Act to ensure appropriate decision-making. Staff reports that this was to begin in July of 2022, until Chief Mike Janowski took another position at the board as of July of 2022. Mike Janowski is working with management, however, in the division to undertake this project. Thank you, Mike. Item 3.3 is to use plain language in all CSLB legislative proposals and bills analysis for better consumer and contractor understanding. Staff reports that the progress on this item is immediate and ongoing. And we hope that this example of information that is being presented today in this legislative portion of the board package is a clear representation of how this language be disseminated in the future. Item 3.4 is to pursue legislative requiring workman's comp insurance for all contractors to protect consumers and workers. You will hear more about this in an item in the legislative update that is shortly to follow. Item 3.5 is to identify and include fiscal impacts for the board's consideration on all legislative proposals and bills analyzed. Staff reports that this is immediate and ongoing, and staff has and will continue to include fiscal impacts in bill analysis. Item 3.6 is to collaborate with local and state governments to determine if CSLB's hazardous and asbestos certification remains viable and is effective protecting consumers in declared disaster areas. The target date for this item is July of 2023. Staff has begun to undertake with this objective with the legislative chief vacancy when it is filled. This completes the update on legislative strategic plan objectives. This is the status update only. No further action is required from the board at this time. With that, do any board members have any comments to share? Hearing and seeing none. Does the public have any comments? Hearing and seeing none. The next item on the agenda is on page 160 in regards to bills for the second portion of this legislative agenda today. Item 2, review, discuss, and possible actions on 2021-2022 pending legislation. We're now on page 164, beginning with AB 646. This bill would have allowed CSLB to collect a fee to remove or amend conviction information on its website if the conviction had been expunged. The board was in support of this bill, but it was held in appropriations committees. There is no further action required by the board. Is there any board comment on AB 646? Hearing and seeing none. Is there any public comment on this item? David.
Mike, yeah, quick question. The expungement, would that include violent crimes or?
Mike?
There's different criteria for getting expunged, a crime expunged, and I don't know what they are offhand, but what's interesting about this bill is it was held in the Appropriations Committee, so it's not moving forward. It was held under submission, which means that people kind of behind the scenes think that there might be more work that needs to be done on the bill, but we don't know exactly what that is, and it's probably not moving forward this year.
Thank you.
But there, yeah.
Yes.
Hi. It's interesting because our contractor from 20-plus years ago had an expunged record, and I was able to locate it. Don't ask me how. I went and spent a lot of time at the courthouse. But I got it, and I used it in our litigation against him as well, so it was very helpful. Just putting it out there, so.
Thank you. Moving on to the next item, AB 1747. This bill is board-sponsored and board-supported. It increases from 5,000 to 30,000 CSLB's civil penalties for licensed contractors failing to comply with building permit requirements, as well as other health and safety violations. Mike, please provide an update on this bill.
Yeah, so this CSLB-sponsored bill passed out of both houses, and it was presented to the governor yesterday for signature or veto. Or I think he can also not take any action, it'll become law, but I don't think that ever happens, so.
Thank you, Mike. Are there any comments from the board on this item? Are there any comments from the public on this item? Moving on to page 166, item AB 2105. This bill is board-supported. It authorized CSLB to grant 50% license reduction fee for licensed applicants who are of armed force veterans that meet certain criteria. I'm pleased to state that the bill was approved by the governor and has become law. It will be effective January 2023, and CSLB Licensing Division and Information Technology Divisions are already working on the next steps to implement the bill. There are no further actions required of the board. Are there any comments from the board? Are there any comments from the public on this item? Moving on to page 167, AB 2347, AB 2374. This bill is board-supported. It would require a criminal court to notify CSLB if a licensed contractor is convicted of illegally dumping of construction debris. CSLB would then be required to post that conviction on its website. Mike, can you provide an update on this bill?
Yes, AB 2374 passed through both houses and went to the governor on August 23rd and is awaiting signature or veto.
As this is an update only, there is no action required of the board. However, are there any board comments on this item? Are there any public comments on this item? Moving on to page 168, AB 2894. This bill would have required a licensed contractor, if they have workers' comp insurance, to inform CSLB of their workers' compensation classification code and require CSLB to post that information on its website. The board did not take a position on this bill. This bill was held in the Appropriations Committee. There is no further action required by the board. Is there any board comment on this item? Is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none, page 170, AB 2916. The board has a supported position on this bill. It provides CSLB's discretion to publicly disclose a letter of admonishment on a contractor's license for either 1 year or 2 years, depending on the severity of the alleged violation. Mike, can you please give us an update to the board?
Yes, it passed both houses and it was enrolled on August 27th. And enrollment is the proofreading process that the bill goes through prior to formal presentation to the governor. So it should be any day now.
Thank you, Mike. As this item is an update only, there is no action required of the board. However, if the board has a comment, seeing none, does the public have a comment? Hearing and seeing none. Moving on to page 171 of the packet. SB 216. This bill is board-sponsored, board-supported, and also has implementations legislative strategic plan item 3.4 to pursue legislation to require workman's comp for all contractors to protect consumers and workers. This bill would require C8 concrete, C20 HVAC, C22 asbestos abatement, and D49 tree service contractor license classifications to have certificates of workman's comp insurance on file with CSLB as a condition of licensure starting next year. It would require this of all licensed contractors by 2026. Mike, please provide an update on this bill.
Yes, SB 216 passed both houses and went to the governor on Friday.
Thank you, Mike. As this is an update only, no action is required of the board. However, are there any board comments on this item? Seeing none, is there any public comment on this item? Hearing and seeing none. Next, we move on to page 173, SB 1076. The board does not have a position on this bill. It requires that the Department of Public Health, CDPH, to make California compliant with federal lead safety law, such as requiring lead trainers and renovators to be certified by the state. The last time the board reviewed this bill, it would have required that CSLB to develop and implement an education and outreach program for all persons affected by this requirement, which would include individuals that CSLB does not regulate, like designers, trainers, employees, property owners, etc. We do have an update. As noted on page 162 of your packet, an amendment was pending for this bill regarding the educational program. We're pleased to report that staff was able to work with the author's office to ensure that CSLB can provide necessary information from CDPH about lead safety practices to contractors and consumers on its webpage, as opposed to developing a campaign for members of the public that CSLB does not regulate. Staff extends its appreciation to former board chair Granzella and the former legislative committee chair Roulaine for authorizing staff to pursue these amendments to the bill. There is no further action to be taken by the board. However, are there any comments from the board? Seeing none, are there any comments from the public? Hearing and seeing none. Moving on to page 175, SB 1164. The board has a support position on this bill. It would have required that the California Energy Commission to develop an online register to track the safe and installation of HVAC systems in California. This bill was held in Appropriations Committee. There's no further action required by the board. Is there any board comments? Seeing none. Are there any public comments? Hearing and seeing none. Page 176, SB 1237. The board has supported the position, has a support position on this bill. The bill will expand the eligibility in the Department of Consumer Affairs licensing renewal waiver fees for program for active military personnel to include service members ordered to active duty on a full-time basis or change of station outside of California. Mike, can you please provide an update to the board on this bill?
Yes, SB 1237 went to the governor on August 23rd and is awaiting signature or veto. And I neglected to include an update on SB 1076, the lead training bill, and that also went to enrollment prior to presentation to the governor. Sorry about that. Back to you.
Thank you. As this is only an update, there's no action required of the board. Is there any board comment, however? Hearing none. Is there any public comment on this item? Hearing and seeing none. On to page 177, SB 1443. The board does not have a position on this bill. It is a committee bill that includes many provisions that do not affect CSLB. The provisions that affect CSLB changes the statutory sunset date of CSLB from January 1st, 2024 to January 1st, 2025. Mike, can you provide any information on this bill?
Yes, the wonders of technology. This morning, the bill was in the Senate to be heard one more time, and then a few minutes ago, it went to enrollment. So I was able to keep up to date on the latest on that one.
Thank you, Mike. Are there any board comments on this item? Seeing none. Are there any public comments on this item? Hearing and seeing none. On to page 178. There you'll find SB 1495. The board does not have a position on this bill. This is a committee bill and includes many provisions that do not affect CSLB. The provisions that affect CSLB that provide for CSLB solar restitution program. The public disclosure requires when a claim payment has been made against a contractor, reply to the contractors whose license are revoked or pending revocation. Mike, can you provide an update on this bill?
Yes, it's in the third reading file for the Assembly floor today. That's the latest.
Thank you, Mike. Are there any board comments on this item? Seeing none. Are there any public comments on this item? Hearing and seeing none. That completes the update of the 21-22 legislation. Let's proceed to the CSLB. Yes, sorry, Mike.
I have just a general question. It wasn't specific on that bill. Before you close the report, please. So for all of the bills that were board-sponsored that are awaiting the governor's desk, does our CSLB write letters of recommendation for each and one of those bills?
Yes, great question. When the board sponsors or supports the bill, we write a letter on behalf of the board expressing that position to the various at the various stages in each committee, and in this case to the governor's office. And I'm glad you asked, because Mr. Fote still needs to approve 2 of these letters. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's proceed to the CSLB regulatory matters. So item 3, regulatory updates and actions. The next section is an update on the possible actions on the board's regulations. We are now on page 182 of the packet. This next agenda item H3A, which provides review, discuss, and possible actions to initiate a rulemaking to amend and/or to make non-substantive Rule 100 changes to Title 16 California Code of Regulations, Section 811, fees, and repeal Sections 812, dishonor check service charge. As your board package describes, this item relates to CSLB regulations. Regulations are board-approved rules that help clarify, explain, or implement state statutes. These rules go through an administrative process before they are approved and become effective. With this item, staff is required to authorize to begin the rulemaking process for the regulations that relate to the fees that are charged to contractors. Former Chief of Legislation, Mike Jamnoski, do you want to provide any update on this item or information?
Yes, this request for regulatory action is just happening because CSLB, as you know, got a fees increase in statute. And that fee increase in statute, it's now in conflict with this regulation. The regulation's outdated. So all this is a request to make a regulatory change to update our old regulation to match the statute. Let me know if you have any questions. And also, just a quick note, the motion is extremely long. I'm going to make you read a couple of paragraphs here. And I just want to comment on it. The reason it's worded that way, and DCA Legal helps us word it, it actually goes back to something Chair Tykert mentioned during the licensing update. So we don't have to keep coming back to the board with things that the board has approved. These regulatory packages, changes can occur, but they can be simple changes or non-substantive changes that don't require another board meeting. So this long motion covers all the possibilities to allow staff to continue with the package, unless there's something really substantive that happens, then we'll bring it back.
Thank you, Mike. So with that, take a moment to read the staff recommendations, and then I will be asking for a motion. The staff recommendations are as follows. Approve the proposed regulatory text for section 811 and 812. Authorize the registrar to take all steps necessary to pursue the rulemaking through section 100 procedures and make any non-substantive changes to the text and/or rulemaking package as needed through the process. Alternatively, if deemed necessary by the Department of Consumer Affairs or the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency, initiate the regular rulemaking process, making any non-substantive changes to the text and/or rulemaking package as needed throughout the process, and if approved by the Department of Consumer Affairs and the Business Consumer Service and Housing Agency, set the matter for a hearing if preferred or requested. If no adverse comments are received during the 45-day comment period, authorize the registrar to adopt and propose regulations in section 811 and 812 as filed with the Office of Administrative Law for public notice, and take all steps necessary to complete the rulemaking process, making any non-substantive changes to the text and/or rulemaking package as needed throughout the process. At this time, is there a motion?
I would make that motion.
Was that Johnny?
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
I'll second.
Rodney. Ms. Granzella or Rodney?
Rodney.
Rodney it is. Thank you. Are there any comments from the board? Hearing none, are there any comments from the public? Hearing and seeing none. Roll call, Mariah.
Mary Tykert,
Aye.
Rodney Cobos, David De La Torre,
Aye.
Miguel Galarza,
Aye.
Susan Granzella,
Aye.
Alan Guy, Jacob Lopez, Diana Love, Michael Mark, Steve Pinelli, Jim Ruane, approved absence, Johnny Simpson. Motion passes.
Thank you, Mariah. We are now on page 187 of your packet for the last item on this agenda. Agenda item H3B, which provides review and discussion and possible action to amend Title 16 CCR Section 872, Disclosure of General Liability Insurance, and update on Title 16 CCR Section 872.1, Checklist for Homeowners Rulemaking. Just like the last item we just covered, this item also relates to CSLB's regulations. As your board packet describes, this particular agenda item relates to the regulations that staff has begun working on after the board approved staff doing so at the September 2021 meeting. After working with DCA Legal Office on this regulation, staff now brings it back to the board to make an additional request and provide an update. Mike, would you be so kind as to give us an update?
Yes, and at the September meeting, we commenced this, this change as a Section 100 non-substantive, and then when working with DCA Legal on that package, it was confirmed that the changes that we're making are substantive. So if you take a look at the language on 188 and 189, we had to make a lot of corrections, and we had to reword how this commercial general liability insurance is presented in this form. And again, this was to update, it's a long overdue update. It's occurring because of a section of law that was repealed a long time ago, and we're now just catching up to it. But the changes are a little bit more substantive than just, making strike-throughs here and there or cleaning up language. So that's why we're coming back to make this a full rulemaking instead of a Section 100 rulemaking, which the full rulemaking, of course, includes public hearing and right to comment and all of that.
Thank you, Mike. I will now read the staff's recommendation, and after such, I will make a motion. Staff recommendations are as follows.
Miguel, Board Member Galarza, I apologize. I also want to make an update. The packet mentions on page 187, Section 872.1 Consumer Checklist. There's no motion for that item today, but I do want to cover it because at the September meeting, as a result of that statute that got repealed, the checklist for consumers is no longer required to be provided by the board as part of its regulations. And so in September, the board authorized staff to remove the checklist from the regulation because the board doesn't have to provide it anymore. But I wanted to update the board that even though we decided that, we went through the process with OAL and talked to them at the Office of Administrative Law, and everyone kind of agreed that there's no reason to delete this checklist. Even though, and you can find it on our website, and it says right at the top, pursuant to Section 7159.3, home improvement contractors must provide this notice. Well, that 7159.3 was repealed. The legislature repealed it. So the board no longer has to provide the notice, but the law isn't overly clear on whether the notice must be provided. So we're not going to delete it. It's there. It's helpful for consumers. And what OAL recommended is we just strike the section of law from the regulation that said that this checklist is required. So that has been struck, and that's what occurred. So I'm informing the board that we told everybody that we would strike this checklist from our laws, when in reality we just struck a section of law that is referenced in the checklist, if that makes sense. So I just wanted to, there's no vote on this section, but that's what happened. It's different than what we voted on. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. The recommendations are as follows. Approve amendments to Section 872. If approved by the Department of Consumer Affairs and the Business Consumer Services and housing agencies, set the matter for a hearing if preferred or requested. If no adverse comments are received during the 45-day comment period, authorize the Registrar to adopt the proposed regulations in CCR Section 872 as filed with the Office of the Administrative Law for public notice and take all steps necessary to complete the rulemaking process, making any non-substantive changes to the text and/or rulemaking package as needed throughout the process. And with that, is there a motion?
So moved.
David Telatorre, second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Granzella. With that, are there any board comments? Hearing and seeing none, are there any public comments? Hearing and seeing none. Mariah, please, roll call.
Mary Tykert,
Aye.
Rodney Kobos, David De La Torre,
Aye.
Miguel Galarza,
Aye.
Susan Granzella,
Aye.
Alan Guy, Jacob Lopez, Diana Love, Michael Mark, Steve Pinelli. Jim Ruane, approved absence. Johnny Simpson. Motion passes.
Thank you, Mariah. That concludes the legislative and regulatory agendas for today. I now
We'll be convening in this room at 8:30 for the joint meeting with the Nevada Board. Can I please get a motion to adjourn the board meeting? Thank you, Ellen. Second? Second? Awesome. The roll call is not needed, so the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.